It was a Tuesday afternoon. The sun was coming through the kitchen window, warming the checkered tablecloth. I was just finishing my tea, thinking about what to make for dinner, when you came and you had that look on your face. The one you get when you want something you didn't even say hello. You just pulled out a chair and sat down, your phone clenched in your hand. You started talking about a new business idea and investment opportunity. It sounded complicated, all buzzwords and projections. You needed capital, you said, a significant amount. And you looked at me with this expectation. Like I was just a vault you could open. Whenever you needed, I told you, I didn't feel comfortable. That it sounded risky, and my savings are all I have. It's for my retirement, for my peace of mind. That's when I made the decision. It wasn't made in anger, it was made with a cold, clear calmness that surprised me. I went upstairs to the desk in my room. And I found the business card my estate lawyer, Mr. Evans. I'd seen him once years ago to draw up a simple, well, that left everything to you. I dialed the number, my voice was steady. When I spoke to his secretary, I made an appointment for the following week. I didn't feel nervous, I felt resolved. The reaction was not instantaneous. It was a slow eruption, first a disbelieving laugh, then a surge of pure, undiluted rage. You shot up from your chair, your hands slamming down on the mahogany desk. This is a joke, this is a mistake, she would never, this is her stupid charity nonsense, you've made a mistake. There is no mistake, Jonathan. Mr. Sterling said, his voice quiet but firm. Your mother was very clear, her wishes are outlined in great detail. Her wishes were to provide for her family, for me, her only son. This legal theft, ill fight this ill, take this to every court in the country. You can't do this. Your voice was rising to a scream, spittle flew from your lips. The confident air was gone, and in his place was a terrified, entitled child, having his biggest toy snatched away. I watched the raw panic in your eyes, the total inability to process a world where you weren't the center of the universe. And in that moment, I felt not anger, not spite, but a profound, quiet calm. The camera was still running, and I spoke to it, my voice steady. I had recorded this message for you to be played after the reading. Jonathan, I began, and you froze, your wild eyes searching for the source of the sound. Look at yourself, listen to the sound of your own voice. This is not the man I hoped you would be, this rage, this greed. This is the monster I helped create by giving you everything and requiring nothing. I failed you as a mother by not teaching you the value of earning, the dignity of work, the importance of looking beyond yourself. So now I am giving you the only gift I have left to give, a chance. A chance for what you spat at the screen, your voice cracking, a chance to be poor, a chance to be like your useless charity cases. A chance to build your own legacy. I said, a chance to learn that wealth isn't something you inherit, it's something you build, not just in a bank account, but in your character. It's in the kindness you show when no one is watching, it's in the help you offer without expecting a reward. I am taking away the crutch you have leaned on your entire life. Now you have to learn to walk on your own. You are a smart man, Jonathan. You have abilities you have never had to use. Go out into the world, find a purpose, earn your own millions. If that is what you want, but more importantly, earn your own self-respect. You were silent now, just staring at the screen, your chest heaving. The anger was subsiding, replaced by a hollow, lost look. It was the first time I had ever seen you look truly vulnerable. The money you believed was yours, I continued, is now going to places where it will save lives, it will feed the hungry, it will heal the sick, it will give hope to the hopeless. That is a legacy I am proud to leave. That is a useless life. I am happy to have lived. My final wish for you, my son, is that one day you will understand that this was not an act of punishment. It was the last and most difficult act of love a mother could give you to set you free from the gilded cage you were born in. The day of the appointment, I put on my best suit. I looked at myself in the mirror. I saw the lines on my face, the years of work and worry. But I also saw a new strength in my eyes. Mr. Avant's office was all dark wood and leather. He greeted me warmly. I sat down in the chair opposite his desk. And I told him everything. I didn't cry, I just stated the facts. I told him what you had said. I told him about the realization I'd come to. He listened, his hands steepled under his chin. He didn't. The recording ended, the screen went black. You stood there in Mr. Sterling's office, completely alone. The silence was heavier than any of your shouted curses. You had come in expecting to receive the world, and you walked out with nothing but $1 and a reflection of yourself you never wanted to see. And to anyone watching this, to anyone who has built something, who has something to leave behind, I ask you to consider, what is the true weight of your legacy? Is it a number in a bank vault, passed to someone who who may squander its meaning, or is it the echo of a kindness, the ripple effect of a good deed, the permanent betterment of a small corner of the world? The richest inheritance is not what you leave for your children, it's the good you leave in the world. Because of them, choose wisely. Let's talk about the law not in the abstract way people usually do, but in the practical step-by-step way you need, when you've made a decision that feels like a final painful surgery. This is about how I legally removed my son from my will. It was a decision born from a single moment. But that moment was the catalyst, the moment he looked at me, his own mother, with pure contempt, and said, "You're useless." It wasn't shouted in a rage, it was delivered like a clinical diagnosis, cold and final, and in that silence that followed I knew the inheritance, the money, the house. It wasn't about punishing him with poverty, it was about severing a tie he had already broken. It was about taking back control over what I built, and ensuring my legacy wouldn't be handed to someone who held me in such contempt. This is how you do it, not out of spite, but out of a necessary legal finality. First, you have to understand your rights, the grounds for disinheritance. This is the foundation you need to know what the law allows before you take a single step, the emotional trigger, that final comment. It's important to document it for yourself. But in the eyes of the law, it's mostly secondary. The law cares about procedure and capacity. Now, a crucial point: in many jurisdictions, you cannot completely disinherit a spouse. They often have a legal right to a portion of your estate regardless of what your will says. But an adult child, that's different. In most places, you have no legal obligation to leave anything to your adult children. They are not automatic heirs. That's the first, and perhaps most important piece of knowledge. You have the right to do this. But that right comes with a condition. The condition is that you must be of sound mind. The legal term is testamentary capacity. This means you understand what a will is, you know the nature and extent of your property, and you understand who your natural heirs are, your family members. Most importantly, it means you understand the impact of leaving them out. The courts need to see that this was a rational decision, not one made under duress, or because of a mental impairment. This is why the final straw moment is so important for you personally. It crystallizes the reason. It provides the clear rational basis for your decision. You're not doing this because you're confused, you're doing it because of a sustained pattern of behavior that culminated in a moment of profound disrespect. The law may not need to hear the details, but it must be convinced of your clarity. So before anything else, you must be certain of your own mind. This is the groundwork, understanding that you are within your rights, and that your mental clarity is your greatest asset. Once the decision is firm in your mind, the real work begins, the legal steps of drafting an ironclad. Well, this is not a do-it-yourself situation. This is where you hire a professional. Your first step is to find a qualified estate planning attorney, not a general practice lawyer, but someone who specializes in wills, trusts, and estates. You need an expert. Y'all sit down in their office, and y'all explain your situation plainly. You don't need to get emotional, you just need to state your intention clearly. Judge, he just nodded and said, "I understand. What would you like to do?" "I wish to disinherit my son." "A good attorney want, judge you, they'll guide you. They will draft a new will for you. This document must be meticulous. The most critical part is the disinheritance clause itself. It can't be vague. It must explicitly name your son and state clearly that you are intentionally leaving him. Nothing something like, "I have intentionally made no provision in this will for my son," his full name. And this omission is deliberate. This clarity prevents any claim that you simply forgot about him. Then comes the powerful part, what's sometimes called an interim clause, a non-contest clause. This is a provision that states if anyone named in the will challenges its terms, they will forfeit any gift they were supposed to receive. So, if you're leaving something to another relative like a sibling or another child, this clause protects the will by making a legal challenge a very risky proposition for anyone who might be tempted to join your son in contesting it. It's a deterrent. Your attorney will know how to word it correctly to make it enforceable in your state. The final step in the drafting phase is the execution, the signing. This is a formal ceremony. You will sign the new will in the presence of witnesses, usually 2 or 3 people, who are not named as beneficiaries in the document. They are there to watch you sign and to attest that you appeared to be of sound mind. And under no duress, then, a notary public will notarize the signatures. This creates a self-proving will, which makes the probate process much smoother. At that moment, the new will revokes and replaces all previous wills you may have made. You must ensure all old copies are destroyed, and your attorney will keep the original signed document in a safe place. This entire process from the first meeting to the final signature is clinical and precise. It's designed to create a document that can withstand scrutiny. But the work isn't over once the will is signed. The next phase is about protecting your decision. You must take steps to avoid a will contest after you're gone, because he will likely challenge it. You have to prepare for that now. One of the most effective strategies is to create a contemporaneous document, a letter of explanation. This is not part of the will, but you can direct your attorney to keep it with the will. In this letter, you explain your reasons calmly, and clearly you detail the history of the relationship. The disrespect, the specific incident, that was the final straw. You state that this decision was made with careful thought, and with full testamentary capacity. The goal of this letter is to provide a roadmap for the probate judge, to show the rational basis for your action, and to defeat any claim that you were irrational or manipulated. For even greater protection, you might consider making a video statement, sitting with your attorney on the record, stating your name, the date, and your reasons for the disinheritance. This provides powerful evidence of your sound mind at the time the will was executed. Furthermore, it's a wise precaution to have a physical checkup around the time you sign the will. A clean bill of health from a physician noting your mental acuity can be invaluable evidence if your capacity is questioned later. Finally, you must have a frank conversation with your chosen executor and your attorney. They need to understand the situation and be prepared to defend your wishes. They are your advocates after you are gone. Arm them with the knowledge of why you made this choice, so they can stand firm when faced with the inevitable pressure. We talked for over an hour. We went through the assets, the house, the investments, the life insurance piece by piece. We dismantled the future I had always imagined for you. And in its place, we built something new, something entirely mine. When he presented me with the new documents to sign, my hand was perfectly steady. The pen felt heavy, but right. I signed my name on every page. I was not erasing you, I was reclaiming myself. Then comes the final reading. The law takes over. I won't be there for it, of course, but I've planned for it. The will reading is the legal culmination of this entire process. My attorney will gather the beneficiaries. My son will likely be there expecting something, anything. The attorney will read the terms of the will aloud. He will read the disinheritance clause, clearly without emotion. I can imagine the reaction, the shock, the anger. He might protest. Right there, in the office, he might shout that I was crazy, that I was manipulated, but my attorney is prepared. He will calmly state that the will is valid and legally binding. He will explain the no contest clause to the other beneficiaries, making it clear that supporting my son's challenge would cost them their own inheritance. The law, the precise, cold language of the document I created, will do the talking for me. It will enforce the boundary I finally had the strength to set. My final advice to you, if you are considering this path, is this: the law is a tool. It is a way to bring order to emotional chaos, using it to protect your peace. And your legacy is not a malicious act. It is an act of self-preservation. It is the final statement you get to make about how you wish to be remembered and what you value. The process is difficult, and it is filled with a profound sadness. But it is also clear. It provides a structure when a personal relationship has completely broken down. It allows you to take the pain and the disrespect and transform it into something concrete and decisive. It lets the law handle the conflict that you should not have to carry anymore. You use the letter of the law to write the final chapter with your own hand. For years I told myself, he was just strong-willed. That's what a mother does. She finds the kindest possible explanation. A difficult child becomes passionate, a selfish child becomes knowing his own worth. I built a whole vocabulary of excuses to shield myself from the truth, because the truth was too painful to look at directly. The signs were always there. If I am honest, from the time he was a teenager, everything was a transaction. His affection, his help, even a simple conversation. It all came with a price. He lacked empathy. That's the clinical word, isn't it? He couldn't truly step into someone else's shoes. If I was upset, he'd either get angry that my mood was inconveniencing him, or he'd completely dismiss it. You're too sensitive, he'd say. Why do you always have to be so dramatic? He had a way of turning my own feelings against me. And the entitlement, it was breathtaking. He believed the world owed him everything: a better car, a bigger promotion, a larger slice of my attention. And I gave it because I thought that's what love was. I thought if I just gave enough, he would finally see me. He would finally be the son I dreamed of. But it was a bottomless pit. The more I gave, the more he expected, the more. He expected, the more he devalued what I had already given. The devaluation was the worst part. It was so subtle at first, a backhanded compliment. This dinner is good for something you threw together. Then it became more direct. You never really understood how to support me. He would build me up only to tear me down. He'd love bomb me after a period of coldness, keeping me off balance, desperate for his approval. I was trapped in a cycle of abuse. That's what the therapist called it. And I resisted that word at first, abuse from my own son. But that's exactly what it was, an emotional and psychological abuse. Weeks turned into months. You never called, I heard nothing from you. I suppose you were still angry, waiting for me to apologize, to come around. I went about my life. I started volunteering at a local community center. I found a new rhythm. The hurt was still there, a dull ache. But it was no longer consuming me. It was just a part of me now, like a scar. Then last fall I got sick. It was serious. I didn't call you. The doctors said I should have someone with me, but I couldn't bear the thought of you being. The comment, the useless moment, that wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of 1,000 smaller cuts. We were arguing about money, of course. He wanted help with a new investment property, something far beyond what I could possibly afford. I said no. I finally, for the first time in a long time, said no. And his face, it changed. The charming mask he shows the world just slipped away. And what was underneath was cold and cruel. He didn't just get angry, he became contemptuous. He looked me up and down and said, it's no wonder Dad left you utterly useless when it actually matters. And in that moment, something in me broke, but it wasn't a break into pieces, it was a break into clarity. The air just went still. All the excuses I'd ever made for him evaporated. The words hung in the air. And I saw them for what they were, not a moment of anger, but a tactic, a classic devaluation tactic. It was designed to hurt me, to shock me, to make me so desperate to regain his favor that I'd open my checkbook just to hear a kind word again. It was manipulation, pure and simple. That was the awakening. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just turned and walked away. And that silence, that was the beginning of everything changing. After that, I knew I needed help. I couldn't navigate this alone anymore. I found a therapist who specialized in personality disorders. I started reading. I devoured books on narcissism, on emotional manipulation, on setting boundaries. And for the first time, I had a language for what I was experiencing. I wasn't going crazy. I wasn't a bad mother. I was dealing with a person who had a profoundly disordered way of relating to the world. The most important thing I learned was about fuel. Narcissists need fuel: attention, admiration, drama, resource to feed their fragile sense of self. And I realized with a horrible sinking feeling that my financial support was his primary fuel. It wasn't just money. It was a symbol. Every check I wrote was a message: your treatment of me is acceptable. I will pay for your affection. I was funding my own abuse. I was enabling the very behavior that was destroying us both. My generosity wasn't kindness anymore, it was a sickness. I was complicit. That's when I started thinking about the will. It wasn't a sudden, vengeful decision. It was a slow, deliberate process. It felt like the ultimate boundary, the final necessary act of self-preservation. I had to ask myself a hard question. If I truly love my son, do I continue to enable a pathology that will prevent him from ever forming genuine connections? Do I leave him a fortune that will only reinforce his entitlement and isolation? The answer was no. Changing the will became not an act of punishment, but an act of detachment, detaching with love. It was me saying, I love you too much to continue financing your illness. The cycle stops here. I had to believe on some level that this consequence, this profound shock to his system, might be the only thing that could ever possibly spark a moment of self-reflection in him. It was a long shot, but continuing to enable him offered no shot at all. The day of the reading was surreal. I sat there watching him. He was so confident, so sure of his prize. He had that slight smug smile. He was already spending the money in his head. The lawyer's voice was calm and steady. When he got to the part about the trust being dissolved and the assets being redirected to a charity for victims of emotional abuse, the room went silent. I could feel the heat of his gaze on me. They're out of obligation. I went through the treatments alone. It was during that time that I updated the will one last time, adding a final clause. Mr. Evans tried to argue, but I was firm. When I got better, I knew the final act was inevitable. I instructed Mr. Evans to proceed. Then came the reaction, the narcissistic injury. It's a specific thing. It's not just anger, it's a rage born of a shattered self-image. He stood up so fast his chair scraped back. This is a mistake. He said, his voice tight. She's not in her right mind. You've coerced her. He pointed at the lawyer. Then at me. Mother, tell them. This is a joke. This isn't funny. That was the first stage disbelief. The refusal to accept a reality that doesn't conform to his grandiosity. Then came the manipulation, the gaslighting. His tone shifted, became almost pleading. Mom, we talked about this. You said you wanted to see me secure. Don't you remember? You're confused. The stress has been getting to you. He was trying to rewrite history right there, in the room, to make me doubt my own sanity. It was a textbook maneuver. But for the first time, I saw it clearly. I saw the gears turning. I didn't feel doubt. I felt sad and resolved. When his attempts to manipulate didn't work, the rage returned fuller and hotter. After everything I've done for this family, this is how you thank me. You're a spiteful old woman. You've always been jealous of my success. The entitlement was on full display. He truly believed my estate was a reward for his existence, a tribute he was owed. He couldn't conceive that his behavior had any consequences. The devaluation came back to y'all die alone, and bitter, and y'all deserve it. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. And in the silence he left behind, I expected to feel grief or guilt. But I didn't. I felt quiet, a profound, deep peace. The cycle was broken. The fuel line was cut. His words, as cruel as they were, had no power over me anymore. Because I was no longer seeking his approval. My validation wasn't out there. In his acceptance, it was right here inside me. I had protected myself. I had chosen my own well-being over the desperate hope for a relationship that was always and only going to be a source of pain. The cowardice would have been to continue, as I was to buy fleeting moments of fake affection at the cost of my own soul. This wasn't cowardice. This was the bravest thing I've ever done. It was an act of love for myself, and for the faint, distant possibility that the son I love might one day be forced by the emptiness to look inward and begin a real journey. But that journey is his to take. My journey was to finally stop carrying him, and in that release, I found a freedom I hadn't felt in decades. JSON parse, or network error, expecting value line 247 column, 1 char 1353. The paperwork was finalized years ago, long before you ever started talking about stocks and investments. And your future. You see, a mother knows her child. She knows their strengths. And she knows, with a painful clarity, their weaknesses. I saw the entitlement beginning to bloom, a quiet weed in the garden of your character. It was in the little things, the way you assumed the car would always have gas, the way you never asked the cost of your tuition, just expected it to be paid. So I went to a lawyer, not the family one, but a specialist. We met in a quiet office that smelled of old books and serious decisions. I laid it all out for him. My estate, the houses, the portfolio, your father. And I built from nothing. And I told him my fear that the money would ruin you, that it would feed the worst parts of you instead of nurturing the best. The meeting was set for a week after my passing. I am telling you this now because I need you to understand the sequence of events. I need you to see the intention behind it. Also picture it, the same office, the same leather chairs, you walking in looking confident, maybe a little somber for show. But underneath it, expectant. You'd heard the estate was sizable. You'd probably already made plans. The plan was complex, but its heart was simple. The bulk of everything, nearly all of it, was always destined for the charitable trust. The one for arts education I've volunteered with for 20 years, that was never going to change. But for you there was a provision, a trust within a trust, a sum of money that would have set you up for life, truly not just comfortable but free. But it wasn't a gift, it was an opportunity, a test. The terms were specific. You would receive a generous monthly allowance for 5 years after my passing, enough to live well, but not enough to be careless during that time. You were to be employed or building a business showing financial initiative. You were to meet quarterly with the trustees, showing them your progress, your plans. There was a clause about personal conduct, a vague term, I know. But the lawyer insisted it was necessary. It essentially meant you couldn't bring disgrace to the family name. It was all about demonstrating respect, respect for the money, respect for the legacy, and most importantly, respect for the person who gave it to you. You never knew any of this. I made everyone swear to secrecy, the lawyer, the trustees. I wanted it to be a real test of your character, not a performance. I had hoped, so much hope. I thought that with time, and with the gentle guidance of the trustees, you would mature, you would see the value of building something yourself. I dreamed of the day 5 years after I was gone when the trustees would call you in, and tell you that you had passed, that you had earned not just the money, but the wisdom that should come with it. That was my secret hope, that you would become the man I always knew you could be without the corruption of instant wealth. I held on to that hope even when the arguments started, when you began pressing me about the will, about signing things over to you early. Id deflect, change the subject. I told myself it was just a phase, that you were anxious about the future, but a part of me knew the final exam was coming, and I was desperately hoping you wouldn't have to take it. Then it happened that Tuesday afternoon you came over, and the air was tense from the moment you walked in. You didn't ask about my doctor's appointment. You went straight to the point. You needed a significant amount of money for an investment opportunity. You said a sure thing. When I asked questions, when I hesitated, your tone shifted. It became sharp, demanding. You listed all the things you deserved: the money your father left, the years I had managed it. You said I was hoarding what was rightfully yours. And then, you said it, the words, that I had secretly drafted a legal document to protect against you. Looked me right in the eye, your face cold with the anger I didn't recognize. And you said, you're a useless mom, you're just a useless old woman sitting on my inheritance. In that moment, my heart didn't just break, it confirmed something. The hope I had clung to for years evaporated, leaving behind the cold, hard truth. I had tried so hard to outmaneuver the argument, your cruelty. It was the trigger, the final unintended test. And you had failed catastrophically. My heartbreak was immense, a physical pain in my chest. But woven through the sorrow was a grim, terrible satisfaction. My plan, the one I created out of fear and love, was necessary. You had just proven it beyond any doubt. Mr. Evans was sitting behind his desk, the folder in front of him. He didn't mince words, he expressed his condolences. And then he began to read. Id asked him to read it verbatim. I wanted you to hear my words in the legal language I had chosen so carefully. He started with the preliminaries. And then he got to the disbursements. He listed the small sentimental items left to cousins, to friends. You were probably getting impatient. Then he paused, he adjusted his glasses, and he read the clause. The scene in the lawyer's office, the one I've played out in my mind 100 times, is cold and formal. You're sitting there, probably still angry from our last conversation, expecting a simple reading of a simple, will you think you're about to be crowned king? The lawyer, Mr. Evans, is a kind man, but his face is grave. He will explain that the document he is about to read is a secondary will. He will talk about the charitable foundation of the arts as the primary beneficiary. You'll shift in your seat, confused. Then he will get to your portion. He will explain the trust, the 5-year stipend, the conditions. Your face will pale. You'll think it's a mistake. And then Mr. Evans will reach the clause, the failure clause. He will read it aloud in his calm, measured voice. Should the beneficiary, through action or public statement, demonstrate a profound lack of respect for the testator, or show a pattern of financial irresponsibility that contradicts the spirit of this trust, the trustees are empowered to revoke the future inheritance and redirect the funds to the primary charitable beneficiary. He will then look at you not with malice, but with a professional pity. He will say that my passing, while tragic, did not immediately void your claim. The trust was designed to give you a chance at redemption. But my personal logs, coupled with the sworn affidavit from my home aide, who witnessed our final argument, provided the evidence the trustees needed. Your words, you're a useless mom, were entered into the official record as the definitive example of a profound lack of respect. Your demand for the money without a viable plan was cited as financial irresponsibility. The test was over. You failed. The money you thought was yours, the future you felt entitled to, is gone. It now belongs to the trust to fund music lessons and art supplies for children who will never know your name. The lesson you will learn in that office is the bitterest one of all. It's not that you were tricked, it's that you were given a chance built on a mother's desperate love and clear-eyed fear. And you threw it away. You failed a test you never knew you were taking. The realization will dawn on your face, I am sure of it, the shock, the anger. And then, hopefully, the shame, the understanding that this wasn't about me being vengeful from the grave. It was about me knowing you, truly knowing you, and trying to save you from yourself. My sorrow is that the plan worked, that my protective mechanism, my last act of motherhood, had to be activated. I wanted so badly for it to be an unnecessary contingency, a piece of legal fiction that would never see the light of day. I wanted to be wrong about you, but you showed me in our last moments together that I was right. The final message, the one I hope you eventually understand, is that the true inheritance was never the money, it was integrity. It was the character to build your own life, to be grateful for what you are given, and to respect the people who give it. That is an inheritance that cannot be written into a will, it cannot be gifted or transferred, it can only be earned. And by the time you hear these words, it is too late for you to earn it from me. The only thing left for you now is to earn it for yourself. That you were not prepared for. The clause that stated that due to the irrevocable breakdown of our relationship, and specifically citing your expressed belief that I was, and I quote from your own words, useless, I had found it necessary to reconsider the purpose of my legacy. It stated that after considerable reflection, I had determined that a financial inheritance would serve no purpose in mending a bond you yourself had severed. It stated that therefore you, my son, were hereby disinherited, you would receive nothing beyond a single. That's when your face changed, the polite mask just slipped. You stood up so fast the chair scraped against the floor. You started listing all the things you thought I'd done wrong, how I'd never supported your ambitions, how I'd always been too cautious, too scared. Your voice got louder and louder, filling the quiet kitchen. And then you said it, the words came out so easily, like you'd been practicing them. You looked me straight in the eye, and you said, you're a useless mom, completely useless. Specific item. I wish I could have seen your face. Mr. Evans told me later that your expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and then to a kind of panicked anger. You started to speak to interrupt him, but he held up a hand. He continued reading. He detailed the full value of the estate. He listed the house, the stocks, the savings. And then he named the beneficiary, not you, but a charity, a foundation, that provides housing, education, and support for single mothers who are building a life from nothing, women who are seen as useless by a world that underestimates them. Every last dollar, every asset was assigned to them. You finally found your voice. It started as a protest, then turned into a plea. You said it was a mistake, that I couldn't have been in my right mind. You said that I loved you, that I'd always loved you, that those words you said were just a mistake spoken in anger. You begged Mr. Evans to reconsider, to challenge the will, and that's when he gave you the letter, the one I wrote for you to be read after the main will. He handed it to you across the desk. Your hands were trembling as you opened it, and this is what it said. You called me useless. I thought about that for a long time. I cried over it. And then I decided to believe you. If I am useless to you, then it makes no sense to give you the products of my life's work. So I decided to be useful elsewhere. I am being useful to women who will appreciate a second chance. I am being useful to children who will benefit from a safe home. I am being useful in a way that honors the struggle of my own mother. You taught me a brutal lesson about my value in your eyes. This is my lesson in return. Your inheritance was never the money. It was supposed to be the love, the values, the home I built for you. You rejected that long before you rejected the cash. My self-worth is not defined by your cruel words. It is defined by my actions, and my final action is to build a legacy of respect for myself. And for the women who come after me, the only thing I leave you is the silver picture frame on your dresser, the one with the photo of us at the beach. When you were 5, you looked at me like I was the entire world. That is the only inheritance I have that you cannot devalue. I hope one day you understand what you truly threw away. Mr. Evans said you sat there for a long time, just holding the letter. The fight had gone out of you. You just looked empty. You stood up and left without another word. And that was that. It was over. So now you know, this wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of reclamation. For the first time in a long time, I felt powerful. I felt like my life had a purpose that was entirely my own. You took away the illusion of a relationship built on love and respect. And in its place, you gave me the truth, and I built a new future on that truth, a future where I am not useless, where I am a foundation, a cornerstone for someone else. My legacy isn't in your bank account, it's in the lives of those women. And the silence after you said that was heavier than any noise. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. It was like all the air had been sucked out of the room. I just stood there holding onto the edge of the counter watching you. You didn't even wait for a response. You turned around, your shoulders tense with anger, and you walked out. The front door slammed shut, and the sound echoed through the whole house. I listened to your car start and drive away, and I was left alone with that word hanging in the air, useless. Their children. It's in the quiet knowledge that I ended my life, not as a resource to be managed, but as a woman who finally learned her own worth, and that my son is the most useful thing I have ever done. The disrespect didn't start with those 3 words. It was a slow, steady drip of condescension, a pattern, a comment about my outdated phone, a sigh When I asked him to explain a news article, the way he'd talk over me at family dinners. As if my thoughts were just background noise, I started to see it as a kind of experiment, a hypothesis I needed to test. Was it just carelessness? Or was it something deeper, something more contemptuous? So I set the stage. I deliberately chose a topic I knew he felt strongly about, his new business venture. I waited for a quiet moment, just the two of us in the kitchen. I made my question sound hesitant, a little confused. I asked him about the financial risks, playing the part of the worried out-of-touch mother. I saw the impatience flash in his eyes, the slight tightening of his jaw. He launched into his explanation, his voice dripping with that familiar patronizing tone. And then I pushed it just a little further. Said something innocent, something like, "I just worry you're stretching yourself too thin." That was the trigger. The mask of civility slipped completely. His face hardened. He looked me right in the eye with a coldness that was entirely new. "You don't get it. You never have. You're a useless mom." He said it with such finality, such pure, unadulterated conviction. And in that moment, my hypothesis was confirmed. It wasn't just frustration, it was his fundamental belief. The words hung in the air, "You're a useless." And instead of crumbling, something inside me clicked into place. It was like a switch flipping. The emotional part of me, the part that wanted to weep, just shut down. And the strategist woke up. This wasn't a wound anymore, it was a data point. The final piece of evidence I needed. He had shown me exactly who he was, and now I knew exactly what I had to do. I waited until he left, the sound of the door closing echoing in the sudden quiet. Then I moved. It wasn't with anger. It was with a cold, clear focus. My first call wasn't to a friend to cry, it was to my lawyer's office. I made an appointment for the next morning, under a vague pretense of estate planning review. I needed to understand the battlefield. I needed to know exactly what power I held. Sitting in that sleek, quiet office, the next day felt like stepping into a war room. My lawyer, Mr. Davison, is a serious man in his 60s, with a face that rarely shows surprise. I didn't mince words. I told him I wanted to disinherit my son completely. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, not judgment, but a professional caution. He laid out the documents, the current, the trusts, the portfolio. He explained the process with a calm, methodical precision. He warned me about the potential contest, the legal challenges my son could mount. "We need to make this ironclad," he said. "We need to demonstrate testamentary capacity and avoid the appearance of undue influence." We discussed everything: the creation of a non-contest clause, the specific detailed language to be used, the importance of a psychiatric evaluation to document my soundness of mind, a preemptive strike against any claim of instability. It was all so clinical, so deliberate. I listened, I asked questions, and I approved every step. Next, I met with my financial advisor, Sarah. I needed to see the whole picture. The numbers on the screen weren't just numbers, they were the tools of my response. The inheritance wasn't just a lump sum, it was a lifetime of work, of careful investment. There was the house, of course, the investment portfolio, the life insurance policies. I had Sarah run projections. What if the bulk of the estate went to my sister's children, to a few select charities it always quietly supported, to endow a scholarship fund for? I sat down at the table. My hands were shaking. I looked around the kitchen, at the home I'd built, at the memories on the fridge. And all I could think was, is that really what you see after everything, after all the years? Is that all I am to you? The tea in my cup had gone cold. I poured it down the sink. And the whole time my mind was replaying that moment, the coldness in your eyes, the sheer certainty in your voice. You didn't say it in a fit of rage, you said it like it was a fact you'd finally decided to speak aloud. Students in a field my son had once mocked as unprofitable, we restructured everything, we moved assets, we made sure that the new will was not just a document, but a reflection of a fully reconfigured financial reality. Every meeting, every signature, was a silent reply to his declaration. You think I am useless, watch me be useful, watch me be effective. The most critical phase was the waiting, the period between setting the plan in motion and its execution. I had to maintain absolute normalcy. He called a few days later, his tone breezy, as if the incident in the kitchen had never happened. He asked if I could look after the dog for the weekend. I said yes. My voice was light, agreeable, the perfect, useful mom. I went to his house. I fed the dog, I even watered his plants. And while I was there, I observed, I saw the casual extravagance, the expensive, barely-used equipment in his garage, the receipts left on the counter for things I knew he couldn't truly afford. It all confirmed my decision. This wasn't about punishing him for a moment of anger. This was about a fundamental character flaw, an entitlement that believed my resources were his by right even as he held me in contempt. Our interactions became a kind of theater. He'd come over for dinner, he'd talk about his plans, his ambitions, all of which relied on a safety net. He assumed I represented, he'd make jokes about retiring and living off my fortune. He had no idea that the net had already been cut. I'd smile. I'd nod. I'd serve the food inside. I felt a quiet, steady calm. It was the satisfaction of a chess player who has seen 10 moves ahead. The game was already over, he just didn't know it, yet the knowledge was my secret armor. His disrespect now seemed petty, insignificant. It was the buzzing of a fly against a windowpane. I saw the lack of remorse not as a new hurt, but as a validation of my strategy. He was exactly the person I now knew him to be. The day of the will reading arrived. I had instructed Mr. Davison to schedule it for a formal meeting at his office. I insisted my son be present. I wanted to see his face. I dressed carefully. I chose a suit I only wore for important business meetings. I wanted to look every bit the CEO of my own life, the architect of this moment. The office felt even quieter than usual. The air was still. My son was there fidgeting, checking his phone. He made a joke about the pomp and circumstance he was so utterly unawares. Mr. Davison began to read. His voice was a dry, monotone recitation of legalities. Then he got to the disbursements. He mentioned a small token amount left to my son. I saw my son's head jerk up. A confused smile played on his lips. He thought it was a mistake, a prelude to the real bequest. But then Mr. Davison kept going. He detailed the major beneficiaries: the trust for my nieces and nephews for their education, the donation to the city's botanical gardens, the establishment of the annual scholarship in my name. With each new clause, the color drained from my son's face. The confusion turned to disbelief, then to a dawning horrified understanding. His knuckles were white. Where he gripped the chair, he looked at me, his eyes wide, searching for an explanation. When Mr. Davison finished, the silence was absolute. It was thicker than any noise. My son finally found his voice. It was a strangled, shaky thing. "What is this? This is a mistake, Mom. What is this?" He looked from the lawyer to me, his world collapsing in real time. The days that followed were quiet, too quiet. The house felt different, empty, in a way it never had before. I'd pick up the phone to call you out of habit, and then I'd remember your words, and I'd put it down again. I cried, of course I cried. But it wasn't just sadness, it was a deep, grinding sense of grief. I was mourning the son I thought I had, the little boy who used to think I could fix anything with a kiss. I realized I'd been making excuses for you for years, the missed birthdays, the curt phone calls, the way. That's when I spoke. My voice was calm, measured. It carried no anger, only a final, absolute certainty. I looked directly at him. "You once told me I was useless," I said, "and you were entitled to your opinion. But this," I gestured slightly toward the document on the table, "this is the consequence of that opinion. You believed I had nothing of value to offer you, so I have simply arranged my affairs to reflect that belief. The money, the house, the security you took for granted, that was never the point. The point was the respect. You failed to understand that a legacy is built on more than assets, it's built on character. And you have shown me yours clearly and repeatedly. This isn't an act of anger, it's an act of alignment. I am aligning my legacy with the truth you yourself revealed." The shock on his face was replaced by a wave of pure panic. He started to protest, to backtrack, to say things like, "I didn't mean it like that, and you're taking this out of context." But the words sounded hollow, desperate. They were the pleas of a man who had just realized the value of something only after he had thrown it away. Forever, I didn't argue. I didn't engage. I simply stood up. I thanked Mr. Davison for his time, and I walked out of the room, leaving my son surrounded by the stark legal proof of his own mistake. The door closed behind me, and I felt the quiet not as an emptiness, but as a settlement. A balance had been restored, not by a shouting match, but by a strategy executed with precision. The comeback was complete. The rain was coming down in sheets that night, I remember, because the wipers on that old car barely worked, and I was driving home from the second shift at the diner, leaning forward over the steering wheel, trying to see through the blur. My back ached from being on my feet for 10 hours. But all I could think about was you asleep in your bed, that you were warm, that you were safe, that the rent was paid for another month, because I'd managed to pick up those extra hours. I never told you about the diner job. You were too young, you just knew Mommy went to work. The first job was at the office, the respectable one during the day that paid for your daycare, for your little uniform at that nice preschool. But the office job wasn't enough, not for the kind of life I wanted for you, not for the soccer cleats you'd need, or the school trips, or the dentist, so I'd come home, put you to bed, and then go to the diner from 9 until 2 in the morning. I'd serve coffee and pie to truck drivers and night owls, my feet swelling in those cheap shoes. I'd count the tips, mostly coins, and calculate how much closer we were to a new winter coat for you. I had dreams, before you were born, nothing grand, just things I wanted to go back to school, finish my degree. I had a box of oil paints tucked away in the back of a closet. I thought maybe I could learn to play the piano. But after your father left, those boxes got sealed shut, not just with tape, but with a kind of finality. There wasn't room for my dreams, there was only room for yours. And I made peace with that, I truly did. Because seeing you happy was a different kind of dream come true. I remember one Christmas, you must have been 7, you wanted this specific toy, the big one. All the kids were talking about it, was expensive, more than I made in a week at the diner. I worked every double shift I could get for a month. I lived on soup and crackers. I remember the manager handing me my paycheck, the extra hours tallied up. And I didn't even cash it, I went straight to the toy store and bought it. The look on your face when you saw it under the tree, that was my Christmas, that was all the gift I needed. I thought you understood on some level, the effort, the love behind it. You only ever called when you needed something. I had told myself you were just busy, that you were driven. But that day, you showed me the truth. You didn't see a mother, you saw a resource, and a resource that says no is a useless one. But that was the problem, wasn't it? I never let you see the struggle, I shielded you from it. I made sure you never went without, even if it meant I wore a coat until it was threadbare, so you could have a new one. I'd say I wasn't hungry, so you could have the last piece of chicken. I thought I was being a good mother, protecting you. Now I see I was building a prison of entitlement. Brick by brick I made my sacrifices invisible, so they became expected, normal. The floor beneath your feet, something you never even had to look at. I watched you grow up, I was so proud. Your graduation, God, I cried, not just because you did it, but because we did it. All those nights, all that tiredness, it felt worth it in that moment. You got the good job, the nice car, you moved into an apartment that was bigger than our whole first house. And I breathed a sigh of relief. I thought the hard part was over, I thought I could finally rest. But the requests didn't stop, they just changed. It was no longer for toys or school supplies. It was for investments, for upgrades, a better sound system, for the new car, a loan for a vacation with your friends. You'd always frame it so well, it's an investment, Mom, I'll pay you back as soon as the bonus comes in. And I'd dip into my savings, the little nest egg I'd scraped together for my own retirement, the one that was supposed to be my security. I'd tell myself I was still helping you get ahead. That's what mothers do. Then came the house, the big one with the granite countertops, and the yard you talked about. You'd found it the perfect place to start a family, you said. But the down payment was substantial, more than substantial. It was everything I had. It was the entire savings account, the one I'd built coin by coin over 30 years. You sat across from me at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped you with your homework. And you laid out the spreadsheets, the numbers, the projections. It was a business proposal. Conversation between a son and his mother. I hesitated for the first time. I said no, not a firm no, but a let me think about it. I tried to explain gently that this was my security, that I wasn't getting any younger, that there were no more double shifts left in me to build it back up. I saw your face change, the polite, eager expression tightened, the warmth drained from your eyes. You started to press me. It's just sitting there, Mom. It's not earning anything. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The more I tried to gently hold my ground, the more your frustration grew. It wasn't a conversation anymore, it was a negotiation. And I was failing to see the obvious value of the deal. Then you said it. You stood up, your chair scraping back against the floor. Your voice was cold, not loud, but sharp like a shard of glass. You know what, forget it. I should have known better than to ask you for anything. You're useless. It was during one of those long, quiet afternoons that the thought first came to me. It was a small, sharp thing, cutting through the fog of my hurt. If I am so useless, then what is the point of all this? The careful saving, the planning, the house I've maintained. It was all for you, for your future. But you'd already written off my present, you'd already dismissed my entire life's work. With a single sentence. The more I thought about it, the less it felt like a tragedy, and the more it started to feel like a reckoning, a moment of. The word hung in the air between us, useless. I felt the air leave my lungs. It was like being punched. I looked at you, at the man I had given every ounce of my strength to create. And I saw a stranger all those nights in the rain, All the Christmases, the worn-out coats, the empty stomach, they flashed before my eyes, not as memories of love, but as exhibits in a trial I hadn't known I was attending, and in that moment, you rendered every single one of them null and void useless. You turned and you left, the door clicked shut, and I was alone in the silence of the kitchen, with that word echoing useless. The pain was a physical thing, at first a crushing weight on my chest. I cried, of course. I cried for the little boy who wanted a toy for Christmas. I cried for the young man at graduation. I cried for the relationship I thought we had, the one that just evaporated in an instant. But then something else happened. The tears dried up, and a strange cold clarity settled over me. It was like a fog had lifted. And for the first time, I could see the landscape of our relationship clearly. It wasn't a garden I had been tending, it was a transaction, and I had been on the losing end of it for decades. My sacrifices weren't gifts to you, they were obligations, they were the bare minimum you expected. My love wasn't a foundation, it was a credit line you thought had no limit. And when I finally hesitantly tried to establish a boundary, you called it uselessness. You dismissed a lifetime of labor of love with a single venomous word. I sat at that table for a long time, and I made a decision. It wasn't a decision made in anger. It was made in a profound, deep sadness, a finality. If my usefulness was only measured by my bank account, then I would redefine what usefulness meant. I called my lawyer the next morning we met. I told him I wanted to change my will, every last detail. I was very specific. The money, the life insurance, the little house, it finally paid off. It wasn't going to you. It was going to the community college downtown, to fund a scholarship for single parents, for people like. I was trying to build a better life, trying to finish what they started, people who would understand the value of a dollar, earned through sacrifice, people who would see it not as an entitlement, but as a gift. The day of the reading was quiet. You came in looking confident, maybe a little contrite. But I think you just expected a formality, a lesson perhaps, but one that would end with you getting what was yours. The lawyer was a kind man. He read the document in a steady, neutral voice. Painful, necessary clarity. I watched your face as he read. I saw the confusion at first, then the dawning disbelief, then the anger. You looked at me. What is this? This is a mistake. But it wasn't. I had written a letter to be read with the will. I didn't read it aloud. I let you read it silently. It was short. It said you told me I was useless, but my usefulness was never in what I could give you materially. It was in the love I poured into every sacrifice. Since you could only see the former, I have redirected it. Now my usefulness will help someone who understands its true value. My final lesson for you is this: true wealth isn't measured in your bank account, but in your character, and by that measure, I leave you nothing, and I leave you everything. You didn't say a word. You just stared at the paper, your face pale. Then you stood up and walked out, just like you did that day in the kitchen. There's no victory in this, no satisfaction, only a profound sense of loss. I lost the son I thought I had. I lost the future I imagined with grandchildren in this house. But I found something too. I found my own value separate from you. I found the courage to honor my own life's work, to put my legacy where it would be treasured, not demanded. You called me useless, but in the end, I finally found a truly useful purpose for all that I had, and for all that I was. You always saw the money as a weight you were destined to carry. My money, your grandfather's money. You never once considered it a responsibility, only a prize. I remember you at the last holiday party swirling that expensive scotch, talking about which European car manufacturer you were going to buy into. You were so sure, so entitled. You saw my work with the shelters, the community kitchens, the children's hospital. You saw all of it as my little hobby, a harmless diversion for a wealthy woman with too much time on her hands. You called it my pet project. You never understood that those places weren't my pastime, they were my life's work. The final argument, the one that changed everything, it started over something so trivial, a missed dinner reservation. But it never was about the restaurant, was it? It was about you feeling slighted. You stood there in the middle of the library, your face red, and you said the words that finally broke the last thread of hope I had for you. You said, all this charity is useless. You're just throwing our family's legacy away on people who will never amount to anything. It's a useless waste of a useless life. Useless, the word hung in the air between us like a physical blow. I didn't say anything, I just turned and walked away. But in that silence, in that profound hurt, something else was born, a clarity I had been avoiding for 30 years. I had spent my life trying to shield you, to provide for you, to give you every advantage. And in doing so I had created a monster of expectation. I had failed you in the most fundamental way. I had given you everything except a purpose. The days after that argument were the most purposeful of my life. I didn't wallow. I went to the places you called useless. I sat in the bright, warm dining hall of the women's shelter on a Tuesday morning. I watched a young mother no older than you carefully feed her toddler a warm meal. Her hands were chapped, her eyes were tired. But there was a fierce love in them that I recognized. I saw the gratitude not as a transaction, but as a quiet shared humanity. I spent an afternoon at the children's hospital, reading stories to a little boy who was fighting a battle you could never comprehend. His laughter was not useless, his hope was not a waste. I thought about my own mother. She had nothing when she started. She worked 2 jobs her whole life, and left me a little cedar chest with some photographs and her wedding ring. It was the most precious thing I own, not because of its value, but because of the love it represented. What was I going to leave you? A bank account, a house, something for you to sell off without a second thought. You had called me useless. And I finally asked myself, useful to whom, useful for what? I met with the directors, the volunteers, the people whose lives were dedicated to lifting others up. They showed me their ledgers, not just of money, but of lives changed, a family housed, addiction treated, a child healed. They didn't talk about legacy in terms of millions. They talked about it in terms of moments, a moment of safety, a moment of peace, a moment of dignity. That was the real inheritance, that was the true wealth. And I realized my fortune was never meant to be a monument to our family name. It was meant to be a river, flowing to the places where the ground was most parched, where it could do real, tangible good. So I made the decision. It was the easiest, most difficult decision I have ever made. I went to my attorney, old Mr. Sterling, and I instructed him to rewrite my entire estate. Not a single trust fund for you, not a single property. Every stock, every bond, every piece of art, every last dollar. It was all to be liquidated and distributed with meticulous care to the network of charities that you so casually dismissed. They would become the sole beneficiaries. You would receive a token, some $1, a symbolic gesture, so you could never contest the will on the grounds of being forgotten. The day of the reading arrived. I had it all recorded. This moment, I wanted to see it. I needed to see the culmination of my choice. You walked into Mr. Sterling's office with that familiar swagger. You were wearing the watch your father gave you, the one you always said you'd replace with something more substantial. Once the money was yours, you shook Mr. Sterling's hand with a condescending smile. You didn't even look at the camera I had set up. You were already counting your millions. Mr. Sterling, God bless him, was a professional. He offered you a seat. He adjusted his glasses. He began to read the dry legal language in his calm, measured voice. I watched your face on the monitor. At first, there was just smug anticipation, then a flicker of confusion, as he didn't start with the usual bequests to you. He started with the Atlantic Children's Hospital Foundation, a bequest of $20 million to establish a new wing for pediatric oncology. Your head tilted. You shifted in the leather chair. Mr. Sterling, you said, a slight edge to your voice. Perhaps we can skip to the relevant parts, the disbursements to me. He looked at you over his glasses, his expression unreadable. This is the relevant part, sir. Please allow me to continue. And he did. He read on name after name, amount after staggering amount. The Hope for Families Shelter Network, the Inner City Arts Initiative, the Clean Water Project for Developing Nations. On and on it went. Each name was another brick being laid in the foundation of a legacy you would never be part of. I saw the color drain from your face. Your smugness vanished, replaced by a dawning, horrifying comprehension. What is this? You whispered, your voice trembling. What is this list? Where am I in this? Mr. Sterling paused. He took a deep breath. To my son Jonathan, I leave the sum of $1 so that he may buy a mirror and take a long, hard look at the man he has become.